Even though the main campaign of Shadowkeep is over, we still have more content from its expansion to complete. Eris Morn has some more post-keep quests for us, but getting rid of Hashladun's two remaining sisters only consisted of me completing a bunch of public quests. How epic. We find Eris back in the Enduring Abyss, struggling with her phantoms once more. Eris begs them to leave her alone, and they seem to comply. However, as they create distance, Eris drops to her knees. Her screams of anguish morph into whimpers of despair. She needed them. This is a hard-hitting character moment as it shows Eris succumbing to the nightmares that haunt her. She cherished her fireteam, and even though the phantoms can only be with her in their worst forms, their twisted voices were still reminders. Perhaps this could be the influence of the darkness. After all, Eris is known for her determination, and it being able to even break a character like her down could show how truly insidious of a force it really is. With the fragments in hand, I let Eris assemble the pieces. It was her squad mate, Sai's, necklace. With it in hand, she stands up and supposes that she might take up crafting once again. I understand what is happening here on the story level, but without any more back and forth between her emotions, the scene resolves far too quickly and thus feels incomplete to me. Some additional words with Eris Morn help us learn a little bit more about Sai's character, but it's not that detailed and a little too late. But you know what isn't too late? For you to hit that like button. My next goal is to complete the Pit of Heresy dungeon. The journey quest gives us the Zenith Age and requires us to enter the pit in order to complete it, so I decided to knock out two birds with just one stone. The first step requires us to anchor ourselves to the light. The flavor text attached to the quest is a message from a loyal friend. It doesn't give us a specific name, but it's clear to me that this is one of Eris's teammates. The quest also doesn't give us a specific location to head towards, or what to even do. While I had the help of the stream, there are some hints along the way to guide us. For example, the description says to anchor ourselves to the light, and if we look at the map of the moon, there's an area called the Anchor of Light. Thus, that is where we head. After running around a bunch, we find ourselves in a building where we can pick up an orb of light. I need to pick it up and light several plates. These aren't that hard to spot, and the fact that the torch refreshes and it gives you an entire minute to head towards the next spot makes this not too bad. If you're doing this blind, the only real frustration would be not knowing the correct order without some testing. I didn't see anything that would hint at what order you need to light all the plates in, but if there is, feel free to let me know. Our quest updates, and the next task is to obtain some fragments from all of the moon's lost sectors. The flavored dialogue reinforces Eris's determination, but ends in a dreadful manner. Upon reaching the end of a lost sector, we gain access to a new room. On the wall, a 3x3 wall of symbols shows up. A 10th, smaller symbol sits atop the grid. It's obvious that this is what we need to change all the other symbols to match. It isn't that simple to figure out though. Depending on which symbol we shoot, a certain section of symbols changes. Once you figure out the rules, it isn't that bad if you use some pen and paper. The real annoyance is the fact that there isn't a reset button, so you have to restart the entire lost sector. This encourages trying to figure out a solution naturally, and to just brute force it or to Google it. I guess once you know it resets, redoing the lost sector and then keeping track of what order you shot things in isn't that bad. It's more so that people tend to choose the path of least resistance, and in a game all about cheating, incentivizing using your brain should be a process that's as smooth as possible. Our lost sector also didn't reset properly, which is not noteworthy, but annoying all the same. With all of the codes known, we just repeat clearing out all 4 lost sectors, which wasn't all that much of a chore because the locations are actually pretty nice to fight through. Step 3 informs us that our path brightens, shining through the barrier of emerald beneath a harbor built from sorrow. This is where we head back towards the Scarlet Keep. The green barrier is dispelled, and I am finally able to enter the pit. As we pass into the necropolis, we are able to survey our surroundings. The underground cave setting ties in with the nature of the hive, and the Scarlet buildings provide us with a striking view. If we stare all the way down the abyss, we are able to see the end of the dungeon as well. This was hard for me to make out at first, but that only aids in showcasing the absolute scale of this dungeon. I wanted to drop all the way down the abyss, but can't, and thus get stuck on some of the rocks on the side. I waste some time jumping back up, as Eris Morn herself helps guide the way. Also, if you stand on these elevators in a weird way, they can just glitch your health all the way down to 1. I finally make my way into the main room. There, an accursed sword bearer spawns in and attacks us. It is of no trouble. The more important part is that it drops a relic in the form of a sword. This item is basically our key to progress. I did run around, but it seems like the rest of the room doesn't really contain anything useful for now except for the seals. The lighting actually makes it difficult to see, but etched onto them are some symbols. The symbols tell us exactly where to go. If you remember my experience with the Shattered Throne dungeon, clearing each of the towers would show us a symbol of the next tower to head towards. Instead of forcing us to clear every tower, our time is saved, and we only have to clear 3. I appreciate this refinement of this mechanic from a previous dungeon. I guess having to remember the 3 symbols is kind of annoying, but I mean, if you can't remember 3 symbols, I don't know exactly what to tell you. I also don't know if this is technically skating, but being able to just dash in the air with a melee weapon is absolutely wild. It is also here that as I stare into the dark room, that the mechanic of the relic finally comes into play. Hive Wizards require us to attack them with our energy blast. Shriekers require us to block their ki blasts and reflect them back. And Knights just require our regular attack. I'm a big fan of this mechanic. Swords already existed in the game, and forcing us to use all of its points of interactions is just good design. The specific enemies we defeat are also servants of the Broken Blade, which means that there is also a tie-in with the narrative side as well. The green light guides our way, and we can continue further in. Eventually, I stumble into a room where I am faced with an entire wall of doors. I don't overthink it for the first attempt and just try to jump straight across. Of course, I somehow failed this jump by grabbing onto the ledge of the door frame. Taking a step back sent me off the platform entirely. For my next death, I proceed to get trolled. At least there's a reason for this, as for the Xenophage, I have to find some symbols and head towards the top left door. This is where I can reveal the first path's end. I return to the center and reattempt my earlier jump. This is not only the incorrect door, but I also end up getting stuck. Luckily, I managed to fix my spawn by yeeting myself to a different location. I am now left with the question of how to progress. Surely, trying all the doors would have just been a waste of time, and thus there must be something to guide me. I initially looked at the seals, thinking that they were a clue, but nothing came of them. It took me a little over a minute, but I finally spotted this green light emitting from this passageway. It's pretty obvious in hindsight, but when you're being overwhelmed by the location, it's a little harder to spot. Nonetheless, with the way to continue spotted, we can now move on deeper into the pit. I stumble through the cave tunnels and encounter a harrowing pariah. This is an ogre, but not just any ogre. By the use of hive magic, it is immune to any sort of damage we can deal it. Thus, I just run past it, but still die. After that, I can jump onto some platforms in order to grab the light. I try to bring the light orb to the plate, but encounter another ogre blocking our way. We waste a few minutes, but it turns out that we just needed to walk towards the next door in order to use light there. Whoops. This takes us through a hidden passageway and updates our quest. Volmar the Tempted is the boss we must defeat. In the room before the boss, there exist some plates. In them are a type of energy, either solar, void, arc, or kinetic. While fighting the boss, we obtain a elemental debuff and have to place the light in the correct pedestal in the boss room. This then allows us to attack the boss with whatever element we just deposited. I did get absolutely carried during this, but at least I learned how it works. With the secret boss defeated, we still need to get past the ogres. In order to do that, I enter the side rooms. Upon clearing them, I can pick up a void charge. With that void charge in hand, I can then dunk them and work on destroying the barrier. We repeat this several times. The ogres aren't all that threatening, but trying to navigate this maze was pretty annoying. With all the charges in, I finally enter the Chamber of Suffering. This mechanic is a lot easier to deal with when you have multiple people. In our buff menu, we receive the Curse of Suffering. Over time, we receive more curses, and the only way to cleanse them is by depositing charges dropped by a certain tier of knight. The real kicker though, is that we have to stand inside the plate near the back of the room. Leaving it for too long will kill us. So I have to kill a bunch of enemies while keeping an eye out for the special knights. I then kill those special knights, grab the charge, and deposit it. I don't know what the grace period is for the special plate, but without that limiting space and timer, this section isn't really that bad. It just turns into fighting some dudes. But the fact that this changes so much with the introduction of multiple people makes this one of the sections I anticipate returning to the most for a solo clear later on. The suffering ends, and we can loot a chest. Shooting the orange bubble of pus lets us continue. The drop here is full of spinning spiked rotator arms. This section is annoying, and I can only imagine it being the end of many a flawless run, my future ones included. We are then shown some symbols that we have to remember as they guide us where to go. I don't really know what the point of this section is, as it isn't really all that interesting and is just a repeat of the first area. The jumps aren't even all that hard. With that out of our way, we are able to cross some epic hallways and this overly dramatic bridge before being able to rally at the flag. I stare at Zolmak, Instrument of Torment, the final boss of this dungeon. This is who the Daughters of Crota were trying to resurrect this entire time. Unfortunately, is no presence in the story or narrative. This makes my overall encounter against it not feel as threatening as it should. For basically being the final boss of Shadowkeep, the fact that I didn't even remember its name until writing the script just now says a lot. The fight itself is not that bad though. I don't understand what was going on at the beginning, but soon realized that the mechanic of the sword relic has come back. We need to use the relic sword and defeat the mini-boss enemies in the tower with their certain mechanic. Upon death, they drop a void charge that I have to deposit in the middle. With all three defeated, the shard in the middle activates and allows us to deal damage to Zolmak. Of course, there is a mechanic tied to this, and it's that you have to stand in the green energy rift in order to do any damage. It took me a little longer than it should to figure that one out. Regardless, with an entire squad, we can one-phase the boss, which brings about the end of the dungeon. I can't really comment on its difficulty, as the Shattered Throne was mostly a major pain in the ass due to me trying to complete the exotic mission. I was also here with a group, so it's not really fair to compare a solo experience to a group experience. I will say that the lack of mini-bosses made the progression between each zone not as clear or satisfying though. The sword relic mechanic though is cute, and I wish it was utilized at every step. Being able to see anything made traversing not as bad though. The jumping section was less annoying as well, but it is mainly the spheres of annihilation that made that jumping tricky in the catwalks. Yeah, so overall there were some sections that were clearly more refined. I will have better thoughts when I repeat this dungeon and do it solo, but I think it ranks just below Shattered Throne for me, especially when it comes to the narrative tie-in. Exploring Marasav's Shattered Throne world is just much cooler than some hit. Just to keep you all updated, instead of releasing a bunch of longer videos, I'm splitting them up, aka Pit of Heresy gets its own video, like this one, Guard Salvation gets its own video, etc. It's easier to manage the videos this way, and to be honest, I need to maximize the amount of videos I post in order to get more impressions in the almighty YouTube algorithm. So, with that said, the Guardian video comes out either tomorrow or the day after, with Beyond Light just 1 or 2 days after that. Witch Queen Legend solo might take me a little longer to get out, but after that it's just Lightfall. And I basically caught up on the campaigns with that done. I will be live streaming those, so make sure you subscribe. Cheers, and have a good night.